The saga of Chip Flowers is once again among topics up for grabs here on State of Play. Joining us for some analysis from the law firm of Young, Conaway, Stargett and Taylor is Stephanie Hansen, and back with us again is Michael Stafford, a Wilmington attorney, syndicated op-ed columnist, and his work has been featured on MSNBC. So Chip Flowers, I said the saga of Chip Flowers, and that's sort of what it has become now. He sort of says he's come clean, had a press conference detailing a lot of his expenditures and saying he's going to pay back the money even though they were legitimate charges for his trip to Alaska. But this really isn't the end. It's sort of almost just the beginning now.
Well, this is a great example of how you can just continue to dig your hole deeper and deeper and deeper as an elected official with the press conferences and then the slow release of documents and then the statements of, well, I'm going to go back and pay back everything, but it's all legit. I don't think that he had good strategic advice.
Well, I would completely agree with that, Stephanie. Very poor strategic advice. He's fed the fires. He's stoked them to keep the story going. He's kept his name in the news. I know the document dump and the claims that he's going to be paying back the expenses. I think we all have to ask, and many people in the public want to know, if they're legitimate business expenses, if they were correct expenditures to charge to the state in the first place, then by God, defend it. Hold that line. Show us the underlying documentation. Fight that fight. But that's not what he's done. He's paid everything back, months later, but still won't walk back on the appropriateness of the original expenses, but then says, well, but you're not entitled to some of that underlying documentation because I paid it all back. There's a story in the Gospel of Matthew about somebody who's trustworthy in small matters is probably trustworthy in larger ones, and I think what we're seeing with our treasurer is he's not trustworthy with the gas receipts and the pancake breakfast. The amounts may be small, but it signifies a much larger problem in the office. And
in the grand scheme of things, this is not a huge scandal when it comes to politics. And if you look at what happens in other places in the country where there's real scandal, this is kind of small potatoes, but you think this might point to some other things.
Well, yes, and when you think about the charges, what if the Brenner's expenditures hadn't come to light? What if we were talking about this 4 years from now, or even further into the future? $30 here, $20 there, a pancake, some toast. It adds up over time. It may only be a couple of $100s in a given month or even less, but when you tack the years on that and you've got that kind of a pattern of spending, at the end of the day, the amount's going to be pretty large.
And so now Flowers sort of wants some of his fellow elected officials to kind of go through the ringer that he's gone through and release some of their travel documents, something that state Republicans are sort of jumping on the bandwagon with to get maybe the governor to release all of his travel documents, how many pancakes he had perhaps when he travels overseas. Is there a need for more transparency statewide when it comes to these kind of trips and for the governor, international trips?
Well, you can always use more transparency, but you come to the level of kind of the ridiculousness. I think the underlying problem that Chip has is this attitude of, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and I don't have to account to you. Mm-hmm. And right now those are small amounts. But then what we also have seen recently is another side of that, which is I'm going to do what I want to do and I don't have to listen to you either. And that's with this renewed problems that he's having, not just with the pension board, but now we found out with the cash management board. And I think the dollars that we're talking about with that, I mean, a loss of $500,000 of public investment over the last 6 years because of this attitude of I'm going to do what I want to do and I don't have to listen to you. That's a lot bigger problem as far as I'm concerned.
And so we've talked about sort of in weeks past about where this kind of came from, who was tipping off reporters at the News Journal maybe that this was going on to the level of detail that it has been reported. Do you think that this is the logical conclusion of that now whatever the source is bringing in the question of how he's running the office, separate of his travel, that his maybe integrity in running the office is up for question now?
I think that's a rational explanation.
All right, well, I mean, we all have blemishes on the close-ups, and he's brought additional scrutiny on himself, and now other things are coming to light as he spins and as his political adversaries sense vulnerability and opportunity. They tend to pile on. I mean, it's the nature of politics, I think.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Last week, Rob Torno was here with a cartoon about moderate Republicans in light of the Chris Christie re-election win and kind of what that means for Republicans here in Delaware. We've seen the Christine O'Donnells of the world and sort of the Tea Party movement here in Delaware kind of come to the surface but never really cross the line to be elected. Is there a push here in Delaware for moderate Republicans, or do you think the Tea Party will be back in force next fall?
I think when you look at the Republican voting base, it's going to be hard for Mike Castle-style Republicans to gain much enthusiasm and traction with that primary base. I'm not saying that they won't win, that they won't be represented in the mix of candidates, but they're not the people who get the base animated and out there on chilly Saturday mornings door knocking. We also have to be precise, I think, when we talk about what is the definition of a moderate Republican. As the sort of radical wing of the party has taken over nationally, the pendulum has really shifted. And so what was moderate within the GOP 10 years ago, we're talking about people who, by and large, in many instances, agree fundamentally with the policy positions and the worldviews of the more radical wing of the party, but are frankly a little bit more pragmatic when it comes to tactics. And then mixed in with that, you've got some old guard sort of corporatists who, aside from tax cuts and deregulation, really don't have much that's appealing in the policy toolkit. So I think, number one, the moderates have to be willing to have some of those fights and to push back on the more radical wing. They can't be afraid to be flanked to the right. But number two, they've got to really invest time in developing policy solutions that appeal to working families, to average Americans, and frankly, both statewide and at the national level, I really don't see that happening.
Well, I'm hoping that Charlie pulls it out. I mean, Charlie Copeland is now, I guess, the head of the Delaware GOP, and there's a lot riding on him and his ability to be able to bring some more legitimacy, bring back the legitimacy of the Republican Party. And thanks to Chip, they now have an office to shoot for.
Still going to be a long shot.
Is there a name or two of a, because when you talk about moderate Republicans, Delaware, it's sort of Mike Castle is still the standard, even though he's been out of office for several years now. Is there a name or two that comes to mind when you think moderate Republican? Maybe somebody in the General Assembly?
Well, I mean, former General Assemblyman. I mean, Tom Kovac was the heir apparent to the Castle tradition, and we see what happened to him. There's really nobody that I can identify. I mean, when I think about the people that are down in Dover, Greg Lavelle, some of the other folks in leadership, they are again more pragmatic on the tactics. I would call them pragmatic Republicans, not necessarily moderate Republicans. And there is still sort of that corporatist wing that maybe isn't with the hard right on the social issues, but really stands with them on the tax and the government policy questions. So I don't see another heir apparent unless Tom decides he's going to run again.
One name that kind of came up with last week in the discussion was a member of the governor's cabinet, Alan Levin. Do you think that he would consider something like that?
For more than 40% of the vote? I mean, you've got to have the problem with recruiting candidates is you've got to be able to sit across the table from somebody and tell them that the time away from their family, the attacks that they're going to face in the media, the scrutiny that their lives are going to be put under, and the expenditures out of their own wallet are going to be worthwhile, that they've got a realistic shot of winning. How do you have that conversation with anybody right now if you're the state GOP? I mean, if he wants to run, he can certainly self-finance. Self-financing candidates, I mean, look at Michelle Rollins. She could have self-financed. We see it didn't even get her through a primary with Urquhart, who then turns around and loses a state Senate seat to Ernie Lopez in a primary. So if it were me, I'd want to have some realistic prospect of success, and I'd want to hear what does the state party bring to the table. And right now, besides a bad public image, it really doesn't bring anything.
Tough times for the Delaware Republicans. We'll have to put a pause on it there. We'll hit the pause button on another State of Play. Until next time, Stephanie Hansen, Michael Stafford, thank you very much for being here.